Through rigorous research and effective governance strategies, the Institute is building a safer South Africa for everyone.
This node here clearly indicates the nexus between the cartel operations and senior government officials.
Yes, the data...
We are getting confirmation that the cartel now controls Parliament.
This is unbelievable. How could they let this happen?
All patrols, report status.
Sector Charlie is clear. We hold the perimeter.
This is how they infiltrate the government.
We will control the streets, then the city, then the entire system.
The Pathfinder Criminology is a concept developed at the Criminology Governance Society Institute of South Africa. It is a breaking away from traditional criminology. You shall see how in this study. Save to say that at the affront that Pathfinder Criminology does the following. Crime is often innovation. Misdirected a Pathfinder reflection on the hidden genius of survival. The uncomfortable truth. Every society condemns crime, rightly so. But few societies stop to ask why crime occurs with such creativity, strategy, and courage. Behind every act of organized crime, cyber theft, smuggling, or street hustle lies a human mind that is not passive. It is problem-solving, risk-calculating, resourceful, and innovative. These are the very same qualities celebrated in entrepreneurs, engineers, and inventors, only in crime. They are misdirected, distorted by circumstance, exclusion, or despair. That is the Pathfinder insight. Crime is not only rebellion, it is brilliance deprived of structure. Innovation in the wrong direction. Innovation simply means to create new ways of doing things. When a person invents a new business model, we call it entrepreneurship. When a person invents a new way to bypass the system for survival, we call it crime. The difference is not in intelligence, it is in opportunity, direction, and moral guidance. In the informal settlements and forgotten townships, young people grow up surrounded by scarcity, yet they show breathtaking ingenuity, building cars from scrap, decoding phone software, running underground economies, organizing networks of trust in chaos. What the state calls criminal intelligence is, at its core, untapped developmental genius. The hidden curriculum of the street. The streets teach lessons no university offers: how to manage risk under pressure, how to negotiate power in hostile environments, how to distribute goods in unregulated markets, how to read people instantly, how to survive without safety nets. The tragedy is not that these skills exist. The tragedy is that they exist outside the moral and economic order of society. Pathfinder Criminology argues that we must redirect, not only punish. We must study the methods of the street as we study the methods of Silicon Valley, because both operate on innovation, networks, and the human drive to overcome limits. From misdirection to mastery, if innovation misdirected creates crime, then innovation redirected creates civilization. The same intelligence that hacks a financial system can secure one. The same strategy that runs an illegal network can manage a legitimate logistics enterprise. The same persuasive mind that recruits for gangs can train and inspire youth. A criminal mind is often a brilliant mind that never met a teacher. Only survival. Baobab Savannah University, as the Pathfinder University, exists to find these minds before society loses them. It seeks to convert survival intelligence into civic intelligence, transforming underground strategy into above-ground leadership. The developmental implication: if we accept that crime is innovation misdirected, then national development policy must include redirection frameworks, educational, entrepreneurial, and ethical. This changes everything. Correctional centers become innovation redirection labs, crime prevention becomes talent conversion, youth unemployment becomes an opportunity for civic apprenticeship. We no longer say, "Stop them." We begin to say, "Find them early, guide them differently." The moral challenge: this philosophy does not excuse wrongdoing, it explains potential. It recognizes that inside every act of rebellion lies a search for relevance. People commit crimes not only for greed, but often to prove that they still exist, that they can still do something, control something, change something. Pathfinder Criminology asks society to harness that same willpower toward productive transformation. When properly guided, the outlaw can become the organizer, the rebel can become the reformer, and the hustler can become the innovator. The final thought: crime is often innovation misdirected, and innovation, when enlightened, is crime redeemed. The future of Africa will depend on how we treat our so-called criminal class, whether we continue to discard it or begin to decode it. Because the same fire that burns cities can, when wisely contained, light them. Crime is innovation misdirected, the hidden intelligence of the African street. The hidden genius in disorder. There is a brutal irony at the heart of modern society. The same human capacities that build nations also break them. Every day, the news condemns crime: the hijacker, the cyber fraudster, the cartel boss, the township hustler, as proof of moral collapse. Yet if we strip away the disgust and look with clear eyes, we discover something uncomfortable and undeniable. Crime is often innovation misdirected. Criminals do not live without imagination. They are organizers, negotiators, planners, analysts, risk-takers, logisticians, and innovators. They read people, time opportunities, and exploit inefficiencies in systems. In other words, they are problem solvers without permission. In every township, squatter camp, or rural trading hub, we witness a raw, unfiltered genius for adaptation. People build economies from scarcity. They repurpose abandoned materials into functioning technology. They create informal banking systems, courier networks, and social safety nets where the state has failed. What society calls crime, or hustling, often arises from this same pool of creativity, except that it lacks ethical boundaries, moral guidance, and legitimate pathways. The Pathfinder perspective begins here. Instead of judging first, we ask, what is the intelligence inside the dysfunction? 2. Innovation, direction, and deprivation. Innovation, at its simplest, is the capacity to create a new way of doing something. When this capacity operates within moral and legal boundaries, we call it entrepreneurship or invention. When it operates outside those boundaries, out of frustration, exclusion, or hunger, we call it crime. The poor innovate because they must. They cannot afford to fail within the comfort of institutions. Their laboratory is the street. A young man who constructs a working sound system from discarded wires has already passed an engineering test, though no university ever graded him. A woman who builds a food distribution network in a township without formal logistics has already mastered supply chain management.
South Africa has entered
but when that same skill becomes used for theft, extortion, or counterfeit trade, society condemns it. The skill itself has not changed, only its direction. Direction is the moral compass of innovation. Without it, intelligence becomes predatory. With it, it becomes transformative. The underground curriculum, the streets run a kind of informal university. Its lessons are unsupervised, its classrooms are pavements and taverns, and its graduation ceremony is either wealth, prison, or death. But beneath that chaos lies structure and pedagogy. The street teaches. Risk assessment. Every illegal act is a calculation of threat versus reward. Market analysis. Hustlers know supply and demand better than many MBAs. Networking, gangs, traders, and syndicates operate through trust and hierarchy. Innovation under pressure. Necessity breeds invention in real time. Emotional intelligence. Survival requires reading motives, moods, and danger. If universities studied these processes not as pathology but as social intelligence, we would understand that the informal economy is not disorder. It is unauthorized order. The Pathfinder Criminology approach insists that social policy must treat these spaces not merely as crime scenes, but as innovation, laboratories without laboratories. From condemnation to conversion, when we call crime evil and stop there, we gain moral superiority but lose practical insight. Condemnation alone builds no policy. It only soothes the conscience of the safe. A society serious about transformation must move from condemnation to conversion, from demonizing survival intelligence to redirecting it toward constructive outcomes. A pickpocket is a logistics expert without a business plan. A hacker is an IT innovator without a company. A drug distributor is a supply chain manager without ethics. The challenge is not to erase these capacities, but to re-educate them. If we can redirect energy, we can reclaim destiny. This is what Baobab Savannah University aims to embody, a campus where education is not memorization, but redirection, where the student from a rough background finds his survival skills reframed as leadership potential. The moral wound of exclusion. To understand misdirected innovation, we must confront exclusion. Many of those who become outlaws are not born violent. They are born outside of networks, opportunity, affirmation, and hope. When a society fails to recognize talent, it breeds resentment. When it praises imported genius but ignores its own, it drives the gifted toward rebellion. A young person who cannot access university yet sees corruption at the top rewarded quickly concludes that morality is ornamental and power is practical, so crime becomes self-expression through resistance. It is the twisted declaration. I, too, can create, disrupt, and control. Pathfinder Criminology holds that moral rehabilitation begins not in prisons, but in recognition. The recognition that even in wrongdoing lies a distorted pursuit of dignity. In South Africa, crime is no longer a deviation. It has become an economic class. From informal traders to corrupt elites, much of the nation's energy moves through unauthorized economies. This didn't happen because South Africans are inherently lawless. It happened because the system itself excludes millions. Corruption, looting, and fraud are merely upper-class versions of the same survival logic. Pathfinder. Criminology recognizes this. It's not that South Africans love crime. It's that crime has become the only functioning network of redistribution for those left behind. It's the distorted mirror of what the economy should have been. When formal opportunity collapses, the informal system fills the vacuum. The township, the squatter camp, and the village all become experimental economies, unregulated, risky, but adaptive. That's why our statement, "Crime is innovation misdirected," is revolutionary. It tells policymakers to stop fighting the symptom and start redirecting the intelligence behind it. For example, a hijacking syndicate demonstrates mastery in logistics and coordination. Redirect that into legitimate transport entrepreneurship. A township gang's hierarchy shows deep organizational skill. Redirect that into community leadership and security cooperatives. The hacker shows advanced coding ability. Redirect that into cybersecurity training. How do we turn misdirected survival into directed nation building? If South Africa can understand that its so-called criminal class is also its most adaptive class, then healing becomes possible. The genius of the street, the resourcefulness of the township, the rebellion of the poor, all these can become engines of transformation when properly harnessed. This is development criminology, not punitive criminology, turning rebellion into reform. The tragedy is that the state calls this criminality and responds with police when it should be responding with policy. Pathfinder Criminology turns that around. It sees crime as a developmental symptom, not a purely moral failure. Every society condemns crime, rightly so. But few societies stop to ask why crime occurs with such creativity, strategy, and courage. Behind every act of organized crime, cyber theft, smuggling, or street hustle lies a human mind that is not passive. It is problem-solving, risk-calculating, resourceful, and innovative. These are the very same qualities celebrated in entrepreneurs, engineers, and inventors, only in crime. They are misdirected, distorted by circumstance, exclusion, or despair. That is the Pathfinder insight. Crime is not only rebellion, it is brilliance deprived of structure. The evolution of criminology. Traditional criminology studies why people break laws. Pathfinder Criminology studies how people break limits, and how that same capacity can rebuild nations when rightly guided. The old criminology asks, what causes crime? The Pathfinder asks, what can crime teach us about innovation, adaptation, and human resilience? This shift transforms criminology from a reactive science into a design discipline. It makes the criminologist part philosopher, part engineer, and part reformer. He does not merely record dysfunction. He reconstructs systems of meaning and survival. The developmental turn: if crime is innovation misdirected, then development is innovation redirected. This single insight carries enormous implications for policy. Correctional centers must evolve into innovation redirection hubs where inmates learn entrepreneurship, design thinking, and ethics. Urban regeneration must identify street entrepreneurs and integrate them into formal microeconomies. Education policy must merge vocational skills with community problem-solving, teaching not only theory, but transformation. Law enforcement must be trained in sociological empathy, understanding that deterrence without direction multiplies rebellion. The goal is to transform the state's role from punisher to pathfinder, guiding citizens from the edge of chaos into the center of creation. From survival intelligence to civic intelligence, Africa's streets contain a code, a rough, improvised form of logic that enables survival under impossible conditions. To decode it is to discover the continent's most underutilized resource, survival intelligence. Survival intelligence is the knowledge of how to thrive in absence, how to improvise electricity, how to share food without institutions, how to navigate danger through alliances and humor. It is the unwritten software of African resilience. When refined through education, mentorship, and opportunity, survival intelligence becomes civic intelligence, the ability to build systems that serve not only the self, but the society. That metamorphosis is the moral project of Pathfinder Criminology. The economic implication: economically, crime exposes market failures. It shows where demand exists, but supply is restricted, where red tape smothers initiative, where the state's monopoly on opportunity has collapsed. The informal trader breaking bylaws is not necessarily a criminal. Often, she is a microeconomist without license. The black market network functions because formal systems have priced out the poor. To suppress them without integrating them is to suffocate the nation's entrepreneurial lungs. The new development model must therefore evolve from punishment to partnership, legalizing, mentoring, and formalizing the underground innovators into sustainable enterprises. In essence, bring the informal economy to the table, not to the courtroom. The psychological layer: at a psychological level, crime satisfies needs that legitimate society often ignores: recognition, belonging, mastery, excitement, and agency. Many offenders are not driven by greed, but by the deep human hunger to matter. When legitimate society offers monotony, corruption, and humiliation, crime offers meaning, community, and adrenaline. Pathfinder Criminology understands this emotional economy. It seeks to create legitimate institutions that provide the same sense of belonging and challenge: universities, cooperatives, and civic networks that make integrity as thrilling as defiance. The moral reconstruction to redirect innovation. We must restore morality not as punishment but as purpose. Morality cannot be imposed. It must be inspired. When people believe that good leadership, hard work, and honesty lead to dignity, they choose them freely. But when corruption and incompetence rule, morality becomes a luxury of the naive. Thus, crime is not merely an individual act. It is a mirror held up to the moral bankruptcy of the powerful. Every misdirected genius at the bottom reflects a misdirected conscience at the top. The moral revolution must therefore begin with leadership, transparent governance that rewards integrity and makes virtue practical. Again, 12. Education as redirection. The education system must move from rote learning to pathfinding education, a pedagogy that transforms instinct into insight. Students must learn to map problems, not memorize solutions, to build systems, not just join them. Baobab Savannah University is conceived as precisely this kind of institution, a village-style campus where the community itself becomes the classroom. Courses that merge agriculture with ethics, criminology with governance, psychology with storytelling, projects that repair boreholes, power solar grids, and start cooperatives as part of assessment. Every graduate will leave not only with a degree, but with a repaired piece of society behind them. The political meaning. When a people begin to build their own universities, markets, and cooperatives, they reclaim sovereignty at its deepest level, the sovereignty of self-definition. To redirect crime into creation is to transfer power from protest to production. It is to say, we will no longer wait for justice. We will manufacture it. This is the true African Renaissance, not slogans or nostalgia, but institutional invention. Key. The spiritual dimension. In spiritual terms, crime represents the fallen side of human creativity, the same fire that built the Tower of Babel. But even in rebellion, the creative spark remains divine. The task of society is not to extinguish that spark, but to redeem it. When the prodigal son returns, the father does not destroy his inheritance. He restores his purpose. Likewise, when society reclaims its lost innovators, the hackers, the hustlers, the disillusioned, it performs a sacred act of reconciliation between talent and truth. The future. We must build the war. Future of Africa will depend on whether it continues to criminalize its innovators or learns to cultivate them. A continent rich in minerals but poor in imagination will always be colonized. But a continent that recognizes imagination, even in its outlaw forms, will transform its pain into power. Pathfinder. Criminology offers a map for that transformation. It does not glorify crime. It glorifies the redemptive capacity of humanity. It says to the young man in the alley, the woman in the informal market, the prisoner in a cell, you are not a problem to be solved. You are a genius to be guided. 16. Conclusion. Turning fire into light crime at its core is energy. When that energy burns without control, it destroys. When harnessed with wisdom, it illuminates. The role of the criminologist, the teacher, and the policymaker is to become the conductor of this human electricity, not its executioner. We must design institutions that channel rebellion into responsibility, creativity into construction, and anger into architecture. Because in truth, every township is a think tank. Every squatter camp is a classroom. Every offender is a lesson in potential. The next age of African development will not be led only by economists or politicians, but by pathfinders, men and women who can see in the chaos of crime the blueprint of civilization waiting to be drawn.
Pathfinder Criminology, turning crime into a new great trek of the soul. By Chris Canyane, criminologist and founder, Criminology, Governance and Society Institute of South Africa, CGSISA, The Forgotten Pathmakers. When I coined the phrase Pathfinder Criminology, I borrowed the word Pathfinder from a chapter of South African history too often misunderstood, the Great Trek of the early to mid-1800s. Long before highways and maps, groups of Afrikaner farmers, known as voortrekkers, meaning pioneers, packed their ox wagons and left the Cape Colony. They were escaping the heavy hand of British rule, laws they had not made, taxes they could not bear, and a culture that smothered their faith and language. After Britain abolished slavery in 1834, the Cape's farming economy collapsed. Compensation for freed slaves came slowly, if at all. British administrators enforced foreign laws and imposed English as the language of government and courts. To the Afrikaner farmer, this was more than policy. It was the slow erasure of a people's way of life. And so they left. Families, children, and livestock, pulling wagons into an unknown interior filled with fever, famine, and predators. They had no roads, no government, no guarantees, only conviction, only the stubborn belief that somewhere beyond the mountains they could live by their own law, under their own sky. That moment in history, stripped of its politics and judged by its human core, reveals something profoundly universal: the refusal of the human spirit to remain captive under a system it did not design. In that sense, the Voortrekker story is not an Afrikaner story alone. It is a South African parable of autonomy, a mirror of every people who have sought to reclaim their dignity under domination. Just as the Voortrekkers resisted British control to define their destiny, so would Black South Africans, generations later, rise to resist both British and Afrikaner oppression in pursuit of the same timeless goal: freedom on their own terms. The roads were different, but the impulse was the same. When the system suffocates, the human being must trek, inward or outward, to find space to breathe. That is the spirit behind Pathfinder Criminology: to find paths where power and despair have closed every route. To turn struggle itself into a map toward renewal, from great trek to great decline. Nearly 2 centuries after the Great Trek, the land those ox wagons crossed has changed in name, flag and constitution, but not in spirit. The courage that once carved paths through physical wilderness has given way to paralysis in a moral one. South Africa no longer faces lions and rivers. It faces corruption, crime, and the slow erosion of conscience. Where the Voortrekker once battled nature to survive, today's citizen battles a system that seems designed to exhaust. The terrain is different. The danger is psychological, political, and economic. But the need for Pathfinders remains the same. We have inherited a country rich in ideals, but poor in direction. Our history is crowded with heroes who trekked toward freedom, yet our present is haunted by leaders who trek toward power. The old trek sought open land. The new trek must seek open ethics. Every generation faces its own frontier. For ours, the frontier is no longer physical, but institutional. How to build justice, trust, and accountability in a society collapsing under its own contradictions. Our ox wagons are now schools, courts, police stations, and municipalities, all creaking under the weight of corruption and despair. And yet, just as those early pioneers refused to live under a system they did not choose, we too must refuse to die under a system we did not design. That refusal, to yield, to accept moral decay as destiny, is what Pathfinder Criminology seeks to restore. It asks how we can rekindle the old instinct for survival, but this time not to escape, rather to rebuild. The new great trek must be inward, a trek of conscience, creativity, and reconstruction. It is time to trek again, not across plains and mountains, but across the wasteland of corruption and apathy, and to rediscover that unkillable South African instinct to build, to innovate, to endure. Crime is innovation misdirected. After decades of policing, punishment, and moral lectures, we remain one of the most violent societies on Earth. The prisons are full. The cemeteries are fuller. Politicians talk about crime as though it blows in from somewhere else, like bad weather. But crime is not a storm. It is a signal. A feedback loop showing that something deep within our national design has failed. Crime at its core is energy, raw, brilliant, misdirected intelligence. If South Africa can understand that its so-called criminal class is also its most adaptive class, healing becomes possible. The genius of the street, the resourcefulness of the township, the rebellion of the poor, all are forms of raw, intelligence-seeking structure. A hijacking syndicate demonstrates mastery in logistics and coordination. Redirect that into legitimate transport entrepreneurship. A township gang's hierarchy shows deep organizational skill. Redirect that into cooperative community leadership. A hacker shows advanced coding ability. Redirect that into cybersecurity innovation. When that energy burns without control, it destroys. When harnessed with wisdom, it illuminates. It's not that South Africans love crime. It's that crime has become the only functioning network of redistribution for those left behind. It is the distorted mirror of what the economy should have been. The role of leadership, therefore, is not to crush this human electricity, but to conduct it, to design institutions that channel rebellion into responsibility, creativity into construction, and anger into architecture. Pathfinder Criminology is the first South African theory that does not condemn the wounded, but redeems the intelligent energy trapped in their wounds. The corruption of power, at the higher levels of power. South Africa faces another form of the same misdirection. Networks of businessmen and political insiders have fused with the state, Procurement cartels and tender alliances now shape decisions meant for public good. When ministers or security clusters dismantle investigative units that threaten these interests, the line between governance and organized crime dissolves. These officials are not poor. They do not steal to eat. They steal to prove they can, to taste the forbidden joy of bending systems and escaping consequence. It is not greed for money. It is greed for permission. The pleasure of watching systems bend. In psychology, this is called hubristic transgression, the belief that one is too clever or too essential ever to fall. It is the intoxication of unchecked power, the addiction to impunity. Redirecting hubris, from power to stewardship. Pathfinder Criminology calls this what it is: mismanaged genius. The same intelligence that organizes state capture can build a nation if reoriented toward purpose. The same mind that dismantles an anti-corruption task team could, with conscience, triple its effectiveness. Pathfinder does not say, destroy the powerful. It says, retrain the powerful in conscience. Power itself is neutral. It can either create or corrupt, heal or hoard. The challenge is to redirect it. True leadership begins when a person stops asking, what can I take? And starts asking, what can I build that will outlast me? When leaders find joy in institutional immortality, rather than personal immortality, their addiction to impunity dissolves. The thrill of control becomes the satisfaction of contribution. This is moral engineering, replacing the lust for dominance with the discipline of stewardship. The new Great Trek, the Vortrekkers faced lions, mountains, and fever. Our generation faces corruption, unemployment, and the spiritual fatigue of a nation that has lost faith in its own goodness. But like those pioneers, we must trek again, not to flee, but to rebuild. Their wagons carried muskets and Bibles. Ours must carry ideas, ethics, and courage. They crossed rivers to find land. We must cross inner rivers to find meaning. They built lagers for protection. We must build institutions for direction. To trek again means to reclaim the spirit of creation, to turn the restless energy of our people into architecture for the future. That is what Pathfinder Criminology ultimately is, a way of thinking that refuses to let our national intelligence die in rebellion when it could rise in reconstruction. The call to the nation, South Africa does not need another revolution of rage. It needs a revolution of redirection. Every hustler, every hacker, every minister, every mayor, all carry the same human energy. The difference lies only in how it is channeled. We must stop criminalizing energy and start channeling it into purpose. We must stop glorifying power and start educating it in humility. Because every society produces both outlaws and architects. The difference is not talent, but direction. Closing reflection. When the Afrikaner trekkers set out from the Cape, they were not sure what lay ahead. But they walked anyway, into uncertainty, danger, and destiny. South Africa today stands at the same edge of wilderness, staring into moral fog. The question is not whether we have the intelligence to survive. We do. It pulses in the townships, in the syndicates, in the startups, and even in the corridors of power. The question is whether we have the wisdom to redirect that intelligence, to cut new paths where systems have failed. That is the task of Pathfinder Criminology. To see crime not only as decay, but as a demand for design. To see corruption not only as sin, but as a symptom of spiritual dislocation. To take every misdirection and turn it into motion. Forward, creative, ethical, and enduring. Because when human energy finds its path, even the wounded can rebuild a nation.